Hi VC, how you doing? It's been a little while. I did try recording this video a couple of weeks ago and it just wasn't happening, so finally getting around to it now. And this is going to be my top 10 formidable front women. Completely subjective, of course, and your choices would definitely differ from mine, I imagine. But yeah, these are just the front women in rock bands or pop bands in some cases who most do it for me. What you won't be seeing here is Janis Joplin, because I'm a fan of Janis Joplin. She'd probably be in my top 20. But it's all the wannabes she's inspired which exclude her, because I can't stand that kind of faux blues wailing that seems to be the default setting for a lot of female rock vocalists. And you won't be seeing Joni Mitchell either, because I suppose because I got into her fairly late on. Having said that, it's probably been a decade or so that I've been listening to her, but there are certain aspects of her performance just don't do it for me. I'm particularly thinking of, I think it was some footage of the Isle of Wight festival where she did Big Yellow Taxi. At the end of it, she goes into this slightly strange comedy baritone and then giggles at her own kind of zany quirkiness. I just found it a bit nauseating, and I find her voice a little bit shrill, a little bit fragile sometimes. Having said that, she's a great songwriter, and there are parts of her catalogue I'm really warming to, so hey, she might make it another time. But anyway, we will start, of course, with number 10, and that's going to be someone who was big in my formative years, Suzi Quatro. Of course, she was born in Detroit. This is a self-titled LP from 1973, which came out 3 years before the Runaways' debut, and I think kind of gave the Runaways permission to be tough women in a rock band. Except Suzi Quatro was tougher because she was the leader of a gang that was made up of all hairy-ass biker-looking blokes. She had a slew of big hit singles in the 70s. She was always a delight to see on Top of the Pops when I was a kid. She was small, she was cool, very, very relatable to a little kid seeing someone that little, dwarfed by their bass guitar, belting it out on a Thursday night on Top of the Pops. And this is a really good debut. This here is a really good hits compilation. You know, if you want to dip your toes in the water and see what she's about, you got Can the Can, 48 Crash, Devilgate Drive, and what's the big ballad on this that I've always really liked? Oh, If You Can't Give Me Love. So yeah, Suzi Quatro, great artist. And of course she went on to play Leather Tuscadero in Happy Days, another formative part of my childhood. So Suzi Quatro, number 10. And then number 9, her position is based for me pretty much solely on this album, but it's an album I play a lot and absolutely love. It's Marianne Faithfull and her Broken English album from 1979. Now, when she first appeared on the scene in the mid-60s, she kind of had a faked sort of world-weary fragility about her, because she was a convent girl, she was a nice girl, and she was singing that kind of mid-60s Baroque material, things like covers of As Tears Go By, and it was all a little bit pretend. She wasn't really world-weary by that point, but this is the real deal. I think that quarter of a million cigarettes later and a ton of heroin, and she's got the experience to spit out her life stories with a real sort of raspy nicotine croak. And this is a warts and all album, it really is. It's tortured sounding, it's a little bit glacial. The production doesn't offer an awful lot of warmth, but it is well produced. I think it's got that great sort of art rock, post-punk, no frills kind of a vibe to it. There are funk and reggae elements on this. I imagine it's definitely been an influence on people like PJ Harvey. Another similarity might be Grace Jones, just for that kind of glacial element to it. And it's a superb album. I absolutely love it. There's a really good cover of John Lennon's Working Class Hero on here. But the highlight has got to be Why'd You Do It? Which is a call out to a man that's really done her wrong. And you wouldn't want to be on the end of her vitriol, I tell you. It's not a song to play in polite company or when there are children in the room, because the language is pretty choice. But, oh my God, is she the real deal? She really means it. And this is an album that everyone should check out. You know, it's not the kind of thing I normally would go for, I suppose. Although my tastes are pretty broad. But first time I heard this, I thought, oh wow, this is a bit special. It really is. Totally hooks you. So number 9, Marianne Faithfull. I don't know about you, but I sometimes find I have an album that I buy, play it once, stick it on the shelf, and it's years before I come back to it. And this is the case with this album. But now that I've kind of discovered it in my own collection, I can't stop playing it. I absolutely love it. And so at number 8, we have got Nina Hagen and the debut Nina Hagen Band album. This came out in 1978. On it, she's backed by a band who would later turn up, renamed as Spliff, and they produced some really, really solid post-punk band albums, and they're well worth investigating as well. But yeah, it's all about Nina Hagen on here. She was an opera prodigy by the age of 9, and despite the punk appearance on here, she's not really punk. In fact, she's not punk. She's got punk attitude, punk appearance. What she is post-punk, art rock, experimental, completely out there. Her vocals are theatrical. She shrieks, she yelps, she grunts. She goes on operatic excursions at times, particularly on the track Nature Train, where it is full-on operatic vocals, apart from she impersonated Chicken at the end of the song. So, like I say, it's pretty out there. This album is a mix of kind of new wave, reggae, post-punk, art rock, funk, hard rock, and even some sort of Pink Floyd-like prog elements, and some killer guitar solos and riffs on here as well. Like I say, there's nothing punk about the album at all, really, except the final track, Pank, which I'm guessing is was a parody of punk. But the ideology behind the band is punk. The lyrics are all in German, which adds to the snarling, spitting, sort of vitriolic sound of the album. The album opens with a pretty faithful cover of White Punks on Dope by the Tubes. And I guess the Tubes might be the closest sort of comparison musically, because the Tubes were always pretty hard to pin down. They always had that kind of art rock feel to them. Often felt a bit dangerous. Often felt like they're sending up musical forms rather than fully embracing them. And this is just a spectacular album for me. Nina Hagen's voice will not be for everyone, and when you read reviews, that seems to be the thing that really divides people. But she has an incredible range. She reminds me of almost like a female Mike Patton from Faith No More, who, if anyone has followed his career since, his career away from Faith No More, you'll realise what an incredible voice the man has, and how he uses it as an instrument. His range is incredible. Nina Hagen is very much the same. So yeah, this is well worth checking out, this album. So Nina Hagen at number 8. Then at number 7, this is someone who initially when I was putting this list together, I excluded them from a list. And that was mainly, in fact it was solely, because of We Built This City on Rock and Roll, which is just execrable. But had to take into account everything else Grace Slick has done. So I'm showing you Surrealistic Pillow from 1967, which was Grace's first album with the band. And it's a superb album. She deserves to be on this list for this album alone, but obviously she's done so much more. She was in the Great Society prior to joining Jefferson Airplane, and brought a couple of big tracks with her. Somebody to Love and Where's My Brain Today? And White Rabbit, of course. And Somebody to Love was written up by her brother-in-law, but White Rabbit was all her own work. And it's one of those tracks that every time you see footage of the hate in San Francisco on documentaries, or you see Vietnam War footage, or anything to do with 60s sort of underground movement, that seems to be the soundtrack. Yeah, an incredible track. Still have never tired of hearing it. The lyrics are fantastic. The musicianship is great. The sort of bolero beat to it is just quite extraordinary, quite hypnotic. She's a great songwriter, a great talent, a political activist, a fantastic voice, unmistakable voice, and a huge influence on a lot of women who followed her into rock music. I imagine she was a massive figurehead for feminism in the late 60s. I think the fact that she looked good, but that was secondary to her talent and her strength and her political activism. It was probably very inspiring, I should think. As well as singing on this album, and she probably only sings on half the tracks, because I think Marty Balin takes lead vocals on a fair chunk of this. Of course, she's got her backing vocals on here as well. She plays piano and she plays recorder, most notably on Coming Back to Me, which is a beautiful, haunting song and just proves that the recorder isn't just an instrument of torture for primary school children. It can actually sound good, can sound great. So, number 7, Grace Slick. And at number 6 is an artist who I featured on one of my fairly recent videos, Debbie Harry and Blondie. And in that particular video, I was sort of praising Eat to the Beat and saying that it was Blondie's best album, which of course is rubbish, because this is, you know, I'm allowed to change my mind. Been listening to this a lot lately, and it's a close run thing, but this probably has the edge. I mean, perhaps the fact that I've owned this in one form or another for so long and played it so much left me a bit jaded. But it is a great album. And Debbie Harry is a great frontwoman. She's probably, would you say she was the pop frontwoman of the 70s? Probably. And again, strong frontwoman in a band of guys, but she's not just some kind of sex puppet up at the front. She's the boss, no doubt about that. This album's a great mix of sort of new wave, pop, disco even. They were part of the New York CBGB punk scene and were derided by their peers for being as pop as they were. And this album's produced by Mike Chapman, I believe. Can't see the credit on here, but I'm pretty sure it is. And does a great job of commercialising what was a fairly underground sound, that CBGB scene. I say she's definitely the gang leader in this band, and she co-writes, I think, at least 5 of the 12 songs on here. So, a talented woman. As far as how she put herself across on stage and her voice, she purrs, she sneers, she snarls. She almost seems quite bored by the whole thing a lot of the time. She just got that New York cool. And on stage, she doesn't move around a lot. But she doesn't need to. She knows all eyes are on her. And she delivers without having to, I suppose, play up to the expectations of what a woman on stage should do. And lyrically, she breaks the mould. She will sing about, she won't sing about being sexually subservient. In Picture This, she sings about watching her boyfriend Chris Stein in the shower, which is a little bit of a different take on things. Normally it's the woman who's the one being sort of drooled over. So yeah, again, a great model for women to follow. And there have been a lot of impersonators over the years, but she's the original. No one's done it better. So number 6, Debbie Harry. And at number 5, someone who I've featured on my channel before as well, and she's probably higher in the list than she would be for a lot of people. But hey, it is subjective, and I just can't get over how much I'm into everything that Rosalie Cunningham turns her hands to. And this is her most recent album, 2-piece puzzle, recorded during lockdown. And it's a great album. If you're not familiar with Rosalie Cunningham, she was in a band called Person, who were a sort of a mix of psychedelia and prog, and sort of Beatlesque pop, I guess. She's a very talented woman. She plays guitar, she sings, she writes the songs. She's the band leader. She was in Person, went solo, and you don't see a dip in quality. Great guitar player. Good to see her live when she straps on the Gibson SG and she can solo and riff with the best of them. Vocally, I hear kind of equal parts Sonia Christina from Curved Air, Kate Bush, and hints of Susie Sue from Susie and the Banshees. I'm sure I read somewhere that Rosalie Cunningham doesn't like that particular comparison, but I hear it and a lot of other people hear it. So, an interesting voice. About as far as you can get from the sort of bluesy Janis Joplin-esque wail, thank God. And this is a really good album. Second track is Donovan Ellington, which has a kind of a Celtic vibe with violins and some wishbone ashisms in the kind of guitars. Rosalie's always had a slightly folky inflection to her voice, so that certainly adds to the Celtic feel. But that's only one element of the song. Elsewhere, the track The War is almost like a trippy spoken vocal with plucked piano strings and bird song. So a very sort of chilled, almost ambient kind of soundscape there. Duet is piano led. It almost has an umpar band rhythm. And it has quite sort of Beatles White Album vibe to it. There's elements of the Beach Boys on here. There's a lot of Mellotron prog in it. And again, tasty fuzz guitar solo. So you're kind of getting a feel for how eclectic this is. There's elements of Indian drone in places. Like I say, there's prog, plenty of time changes, and the track Suck, Push, Bang, Blow has a kind of glitter band stomp to it. So some real interesting kind of juxtapositions of influences on here. But the whole thing just plays out really beautifully. This one is a grower. It wasn't as immediate as her first solo album or the Person albums, but that's not to say that it's not as good. I think it's just that little bit more experimental, and the songs are just a little more drawn out. So a lot to dig into. And I like the fact that I bought this from her website, and she enclosed a sort of hand-signed note here about the particular mix she chose for the album. She chose not to master the album. She wanted it exactly how it came off the tapes, I guess, and just saying for that reason it may be a bit quieter than some pressings, so turn the volume up. That actually sounds really good, and it's nice to have that hand-signed note in there. So there you go, number 5, Rosalie Cunningham. Now, number 4, I nearly made a joint award because there's two really strong women in this band, but one of them edges it just because she's a true front woman. And I'm talking about Fleetwood Mac and Stevie Nicks. Hey, here's an album you've never seen before. So, Rumours from 1977. A fantastic album. Everyone should have it in their collection. Everyone probably does have it in their collection. I love the Peter Green era of Fleetwood Mac, but I see them as a completely different entity to this particular sort of lineup. Even before Stevie Nicks joined Fleetwood Mac, she was an established songwriter. You know, she'd put out this album with Lindsey Buckingham, and on this she had written or co-written at least half of the tracks. So she wasn't just brought in for, you know, her visual appeal, should we say. She was very much there because I think Fleetwood Mac just saw that she and Lindsey Buckingham could bring something very different to Fleetwood Mac, which would tell the record buying public, I think, once and for all, that that kind of English white boy blues band from the 60s was dead and buried. And Stevie's aesthetic helped with that as well, because there's no way of ignoring her look. You knew that you weren't looking at Peter Green Fleetwood Mac when you saw Stevie Nicks up front in a, you know, gypsy skirts and a tambourine and, you know, spinning around the stage. Vocally, of course, anyone knows Stevie Nicks. She's got that kind of almost feminised Roger Chapman, Larry the Lamb warble to her voice. And again, I guess it can be an acquired taste. I've known people who can't stand her voice. And when I was younger, I must admit, I wasn't a huge fan of it. But it's really grown on me over the years. And I think she's a spectacular talent now. You know, she's gone on to duet with Tom Petty. She had a successful solo career. And she's managed to achieve it without exposing anything more titillating than the dirty washing that is her private life, I suppose. You know, there's never been this need to expose the flesh to be noticed or to be accepted. And I think that's kind of one of the themes that runs through this list, is these are women who are strong women and are, I guess, great role models for women in rock. They don't have to play the man's game to get on and to be respected. So, yeah, Stevie Nicks, you know, she wrote 3-4 of the songs on this album, I think. Christy McVie wrote as many, if not more. And that's the reason why I say it should almost be a split award, but Christy McVie's not the front woman. She sits behind a piano and, you know, belts them out. And she's a hugely talented woman in her own right, but it's Stevie who gets the number 4 place. Number 3 is someone who I've featured again on my channel fairly recently, and that's Chrissie Hynde of the Pretenders. And this is the second album, Pretenders 2. Came out in 1981. And I guess Chrissie Hynde sees herself as the leader of a band, leader of a gang, if you like, and gender perhaps doesn't even cross her mind. It's very much her band. You don't get the impression that they recruited her. It was the other way around. The fact that she may have looked pretty good in jeans and a t-shirt was a sort of a happy accident. She has that kind of Patti Smith aesthetic, I suppose. Bit of an anti-image. I mean, that's probably the most dressed up I've ever seen her on the cover of this album, but most of the time it's just jeans and t-shirt, and you know, there's no attempt to dress it up. Just proper rock and roll. So the album starts with the double sort of whammy of The Adulteress and Bad Boys Get Spanked, and that kind of shows who's in control. You know, lyrically, she's tough. She's not taking any prisoners. But then she also does a cover of Ray Davies's I Go to Sleep, where she just shows her sort of vulnerable, wistful side. And that's just a beautiful performance. And that's the thing about Chrissie Hynde. You almost get the impression she could just as easily break your jaw as break your heart. You know, you see both sides of her. and she's hugely talented. I mean, it's the odd parts of her back catalogue I'm not crazy about. I didn't like the cover of I Got You Babe with UB40. I thought that was a bit of a misstep, but you know, she's been around for a long time. You know, we'll give her that. She's allowed the odd perhaps inadvisable collaboration. And also her militant vegetarianism can get on my nerves a little bit, but it's no more annoying than Ted Nugent's sort of kill it and grill it shtick. So taken, you know, based solely on the music, on her songwriting, on the performances, Chrissie Hynde is well deserving of her number 3 place. And number 2 is an artist and a band that for me just don't get the credit they deserve. And I'm talking about Ann Wilson of Heart. Their debut album, Dreamboat Annie. And I don't know what it is about Heart that they don't get the respect they deserve. I mean, they're hugely successful, but when great vocalists are mentioned, you don't hear Ann Wilson's name being mentioned. And she's got a hell of a voice, and it hasn't deteriorated with age like a lot of her male peers. I mean, Heart came out of the mid-70s. 1975 this album came out, sounding like a female-fronted mix of folk rock and Led Zeppelin. And on this album, you know, the track Sing Child sounds like a funky version of Led Zepp. Kind of style, in fact, Led Zeppelin didn't explore until slightly later in their career. You've got tracks like Mistral Wind on the Dog and Butterfly album, which was a real epic, was Led Zepp 3 inspired folky hard rocker, built around Nancy Wilson's acoustic guitar and Ann's incredible vocals. And they often cover Led Zeppelin tunes as well. I've got this double compilation album. I've got pretty much all the studio albums, but this is well worth having because, you know, it's a greatest hits, but it's got a second disc which is all live material, and they do a cover of Rock and Roll by Led Zeppelin on here. I do a couple of Beatles tunes as well, and in fact the live version of Mistral Wind on here, so it's worth picking up for that. You know, Anne's vocals all seem completely effortless. She seems to be able to switch between this sort of honey smooth, kind of a warmer take on Joni Mitchell's vocal sound, I suppose, without the sort of brittleness that Joni Mitchell has. And she can switch from that to completely face-melting Robert Plant style primal wails. And I say she's never lost it. And she plays flute on Crazy on You on this album, amongst others. So hugely talented woman. And the first album's great, but I don't think they've really had a huge drop-off in quality throughout their career. Yes, there's been some albums better than others, but you know, even the band looks back on the sort of 1985 self-titled album and its follow-up Bad Animals and is a bit dismissive of them because they brought in, or the record label brought in, outside writers. But my God, there were some incredible songs on those albums, and the performances were superb. And to be honest, you look back on that whole sort of mid to late 80s hair metal era, and Heart songs stand up a hell of a lot better than the competition. You know, there were a glut of power ballads at that time, but would you rather have, What About Love or Every Rose Has Its Thorn by Poison? I mean, there's no competition, is there? So, yeah, Ann Wilson, a deserving number 2, and somebody who just doesn't get the credit she deserves, because she is an incredible performer, an amazing vocalist, great songwriter, the works. Number 2. And number 1. And this may not be a huge surprise. I mean, since I first attempted to record this video, she's managed to go back to number 1 on the singles chart. Came Kate Bush. Of course it's Kate Bush. And there she is in her full-on babushka outfit. And there's a lot of fuss about Hounds of Love, and particularly Running Up That Hill at the moment. And it's a great album. I listened to it again this week. I've always preferred side 2 to side 1. I find it a little more interesting, a bit more experimental. But as a whole, my favourite Kate Bush album is Never Forever, and always has been. Came out in 1980, and there were 3 big hit singles off this, which I remember taping off the top 40 when I was a kid and playing to death. So you got Breathing, Babushka, and Army Dreamers, and they are progressive pop perfection as far as I'm concerned. This album kind of perfectly bridges the early, almost naive vocal experimentation of Wuthering Heights and Wow, and maturity of Hounds of Love. But what I find is when an artist really finds their sound and locks onto it, like Kate Bush did with the Hounds of Love, it kind of narrows their field of vision a little bit, and I think they lose something. To me, she was still experimenting here and still hadn't fully found her sound. It's not to say that it's an unfocused album or that it's imperfect in any way. I just find it her most organic sounding, most progressive album. And certainly, I think she used the Fairlight synth on here, but it became a dominant sound on Hounds of Love, and in a way almost dates the sound of that album a bit. This, though, is engrossing, it's immersive, beautiful, bewitching, unsettling, all of these things. On the track Breathing, to get a song in the charts about being in a fallout shelter during a nuclear war, that's no feat. She was a pop artist, and she was not dealing with a normal, I want to hold your hand kind of boy-girl crap that everyone else writes about. She perfectly captures that kind of Cold War paranoia that I remember very well from growing up in the 80s. She's a true artist. She's up there with the likes of David Bowie, Peter Gabriel, and I suppose Robert Fripp for her artistry and sonic experimentation. And like I say, she's never improved on this album. It is my favourite. I love everything from the artwork to the running order, the quirkiness of the songs, even the things like Violin, where she does full on go for it with her squawking vocals. But I love it. The sequencing on this album is incredible, and I say to me the most progressive of Kate Bush's albums, and the one I return to again and again and never tire of it. So number 1 in my list of formidable frontwomen, even though she doesn't really front a band and she very rarely plays live, but there's no getting past the fact that Kate Bush is an incredible talent, and a new generation of music fans are waking up to that. So, good for Stranger Things for bringing her to the attention of a younger audience. Well deserved. Number 1, Kate Bush. So there you have it, my top 10 formidable frontwomen. Love to hear your comments. Tell me about who you would leave out and why as well. It's always interesting in these lists when people leave out artists who you're expecting to be in there, and they normally have a really good reason for it, and you can't really argue with that. So who should be in there, who shouldn't be in there, what do you think? See you again soon. Take care. Bye.